everybody to the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce webinar, 21st of May. Today we will be focusing on the paytech industry and how it is a growing export in Sweden. If you don't know about the Chamber of Commerce, we provide a platform to network within the Swedish Australian business community. It's a great opportunity to stay informed, make connections, exchange ideas, and find synergies with other business members and like-minded people. We have chapters in Sydney and Melbourne and Perth, and also recently started up in Brisbane as well. So we have about 120 corporate and professional members. We are the oldest and most established Swedish Australian business network in Australia. And we've been around here in Australia since 1911. So we were also one of the first chambers established, European chambers established here in Australia. We work very closely with the Embassy of Sweden, with consulates, Business Sweden, and that goes under the Team Sweden Australia initiative. And you've seen us in all these different projects and so on together under the Team Sweden name. We collaborate also with the Nordic Chambers, the International Chambers, European Australian Business Council, and also Swedish Chambers International and the Australian Business Council of Sweden, so our equivalent based in Stockholm for Australia. Today we are going to host the questions at the end of the session. And we will do it in the chat rather than the Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, or you can also raise your hand. You can answer them live, or ask your questions live, and you get an answer live. So just raise your hand if you want to ask a live question. We have a little survey which will come up at the end of the webinar, and that would be fantastic if you spend a few minutes to fill that in, so we can get some feedback and find out what we can do to improve our webinars. I think we are recording this webinar as well. We will post that on our website for people who missed it this afternoon, and also we will post it on social media. All right, so let me introduce Camilla Bullock, another SACC Board member, and also the Director General for Emerging Payment Association, Asia. Camilla, over to you.
Thank you very much, Camilla, and thank you for letting me host this session today. I have to say, hat off to SACC, because I think that you have broadcasted some fantastic material during this challenging pandemic that we lived through to pivot into digital instead. So me and the panel have some big shoes to fill today to have an interesting and informative session. But I trust we will, because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is financial technology, and more specific payments technology. And it's not as dry as it sounds, specifically not payments technology, because it touches us all every day. So I think you'll find this interesting. And also it is a discipline that Sweden really has excelled in over the last 10 years, that innovation in technology and also innovation in user experience. And you know, when you travel abroad, or when all of us travel abroad, we often talk about what we're proud of from home. So you might talk about ABBA or Avicii or Stellan Skarsgård, Kia and Volvo. I talk about financial technology, and I talk about Trustly, iSettle, Bambura, and then I talk about Klarna. And I've talked about Klarna for the last 10 years. They've been around since 15 years. It was 3 gentlemen at Stockholm University who had a really good idea how to make online shopping safer and more convenient. And they took this to the university competition, I think, like an entrepreneur competition, and they came second last. But they took the idea away and they did something fantastic. They became Sweden's biggest fintech, and now Europe's biggest fintechs. They are valued at the value of 5.5 billion. They have 85 million users. And we have today with us here, Fran Ereira. So very excited about that, Fran. And we're going to talk to her about how it is, who Klarna is and why they've come to Australia. also how it is to set up and scale in Australia, differences between Swedish financial technology and Australian technology, and a little bit about culture. And to do this, I have invited an Australian payment specialist, Blockley, from MD from the Initiatives Group, and also Roland, Schmid, who is a SACC member, and a Swedish payment specialist, and he is the country manager for Westpay. And I'm going to start the whole session with a poll, and that is about who has used any buy now, pay later services. And with that, we mean when you buy now and you pay later. So it's as it says on the tin, and you pay it in installments without any interests. So Camilla, would you mind pulling that poll up? And in the meantime, I will ask Fran the first question, which is, on your LinkedIn profile, you have Bergman. Can we claim us as one of us?
Actually, it's actually Czechoslovakian is my heritage, and Bergman apparently means mountain. So I do know that there is a lot of Swedish Bergmans, but unfortunately I can't be claimed as one of them.
Okay. So over to you. Could you tell us a little bit about Klarna and why you have chosen to come to Australia now?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, thank you for the great introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. You know, as Camilla mentioned, you know, Klarna's 15 years old. We're across 19 markets in the world and have over 205,000 merchants across the world that we support in multitudes of different verticals. So we've got travel, we've got clothing, we've got beauty, we've got groceries. There's sort of not a vertical that Klarna doesn't support across the world. In terms of entering the Australian market and why it's taken 15 years for us to get here, I guess what you could say is, you know, Australia's a very attractive market for Klarna because we believe that we've created an exceptional shopping experience everywhere else in the world that really separates us from the rest of the buy now, pay later providers. And what we mean by that is that from our perspective, we see ourselves as delivering this engaging experience for a customer rather than a transaction. And when we look at the Australian market and we look at the level of competition and the amount of consumers that have embraced buy now, pay later, there's still only 10% of the Australian population that has actually done a buy now, pay later transaction. And the addressable audience is at least sort of another 30%. So we decided that now was the time to come because the Australian consumer is looking for a transparent but engaging partner to work with, and we think we've got that point of difference.
Ah, interesting. Thank you very much. And Camilla, on that note, how many people said that they had used the buy now, pay later service in the poll? Oh no, yeah. Okay, so we have a far way to go here then. That's excellent. And I'll take that away from my screen. You speak about experience, and that's something we speak a lot about in the payments industry. And when I say payments industry to the audience, I mean everything between bank and merchant and how your money travels around in the system when you want to consume a service or goods. And we talk a lot about that, that the consumers today, they don't want to pay. And I don't mean that they don't want to pay to part from the money. I mean, they don't want to have the friction of what's going on. As we're talking about frictionless payments, which is that contactless, but you're talking me here about to actually enhance the experience of the payments. So I'm going to ask Blockley, who I had the pleasure to travel to Sweden with last year, on a study tour that we did to learn about the cashless society together with a group of payments professionals. So Lance, your payments experience in Sweden, and what did you see around that payments experience the Swedish companies are delivering?
Thank you, Camilla. Very interesting in Stockholm that at the same time we had in Sydney merchants who wouldn't accept a card under $10. In Sweden, there are many merchants that don't accept cash at all. They say cash not acceptable, no cash. And indeed, the Swedish population seems remarkably compliant with that, because following the study tour, I went on a long walk around the harbour and eventually ended up at a ferry terminal. And you get to the ferry terminal and basically it says no cards accepted. So you couldn't pay by Visa or MasterCard, no cash accepted. The only way you could pay was by the local transit card, like an Opal in Sydney, for example. Or if you're a tourist like I was, it says download the app. So you download the local transit app, you embed in that your own payment card, in my case, an Australian MasterCard, and you buy your tickets. Now, if you did that in Australia, I think there'd be a riot at the ferry terminal, because people would not be as compliant as our good Swedish brethren. But in Sweden, because cash is now so marginalized, particularly in the metro areas, there seems to be no resistance there whatsoever. And really, the areas of cash that remain are more in the rural areas, or to some extent in the marketplace. There are a lot of people with Izettle, another Swedish Paytech company. They have a little card acceptance device like Square. Many of the people in the market use that, but there were some that were still only accepting cash. But in most other areas, you cannot use cash in Sweden. And indeed, there was a busker who said, pay by swish, give your contribution to my music by using your mobile phone. So Sweden's well ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of the delegates were actually, they had heard about it before, but they saw it and lived it when they were there. Roland, I'm going to turn to you, and you came the other way from having the Swedish company establishing, so a little bit what Fran is going through now. What was your experience with coming with Westpay to Australia? Or you were already in Australia that took Westpay here. What was your experience in establishing a Swedish company in the Australian market?
I think to establish is not a problem. It's been very well accepted and very exciting, because we bring a lot of payment technologies that is not existing here. We have an integrated solution for the POS, which nobody has in this country so far. And we offer another way of actually using our gateway in Stockholm, which means you become your own switch, more or less. So you can actually control your onboarding, and everything is done out of Stockholm. So that's a very unique offering that we have for this market.
So did you see, so was the challenges more in the front end around licenses and regulations? Or?
Yeah, I mean, compared to Sweden, I mean, the government doesn't interfere in the payments, and that's why we're so successful. But also, we Swedes are used to queue up, and that's why we're inventing the queuing system. So we follow what everybody follows. But here it's much more regulated, and for a smaller population that we have in Australia, we have to recertify everything that's already been certified. And then we have our local card, F-Post, which makes it also very complicated. And that is the biggest hurdle, and the cost of doing all these recertifications again of devices and applications that's already been certified in the EU and in so on. So that is the biggest hurdle, I would say.
Yep. And I think that you probably passed that now, Fran, and it's also something you jumped through with SIP before, but I'm guessing you have not experienced setting up a company through a pandemic.
No, that's very true. We certainly, I don't think anybody in the world could have predicted launching a company through a pandemic. But the one thing that I'm, incredibly proud of is I think due to the fact that we are such a mature and experienced organization, and as I think you pointed out at the beginning, we are a bank in Sweden. And so the minute that we sort of knew that the pandemic was coming, we had plans that just went straight into place to ensure that we could continue operating in the way that was expected and so forth. So it was a really calm sort of operational model that we were able to just shift straight into gear with in terms of from a company perspective. Of course, in terms of launching a company right in the middle of a pandemic, we had to pivot really quickly. You know, we had to change from being a very much above the line and outdoor launch campaign where we were building brand awareness and trust, to basically moving into a digital campaign to try and communicate with customers that are now sitting at home and basically, you know, got their phones or their desktop applications. So, you know, probably one of the toughest things for us in launching a company during this time is the fact that while we have a great reputation globally, Australian customers, and particularly in times of something like we're experiencing with the pandemic, you're going to go and use the brands and services that are trusted, that are very well known and very well established. And so for us, not having that and being in our infancy, it sort of held us back a little bit. But what I'm really excited to say is that we shifted into gear around mindful money messages and getting people to think about, you know, how they could utilize products like Klarna to enable them to better budget and save during the period, and to allow them to buy things that they really love that they can pay over time. And that, I think, mindful message that we've set to the market has been very, very well received. I think, you know, what's really interesting is some of the data we're seeing as well, and certainly talking to a lot of retailers out there, is while sort of fashion and footwear are very flat, what we've seen is massive increases in things like musical instruments and creative sort of artistic craft-based products and books and puzzles and furniture and sort of home improvement. So it makes sense because people are now sitting at home and looking for ways to improve their houses and you know, keep entertained or explore new things. So it's been really interesting to see the shift in consumer spend behavior. I think the other thing that's been really interesting during the pandemic is that there's a whole new audience now shopping online. So traditionally, the audience that would have shopped online or were shopping online were very much between the 25 to sort of 35-year age group. But now there's a whole new age group of that 35 to 55 that are avidly shopping online because, of course, they were restricted from going to retail physical bricks and mortar stores. And so now there's this whole new addressable audience that, you know, retailers are able to tap into and learn about and then serve up, you know, I guess personalized content to in a meaningful way. So it's been a really interesting time, but we're really firmly focused on coming out the other side even stronger and partnering, to be honest, with retailers that want to have a long-term sustainable future here in Australia with someone like ourselves.
Yep. This with the changed behavior in the EPA, we've been running a lot of webinars like everybody else over the last couple of months. And we're talking a lot about this change of consumers' way of paying then. But I guess the big question is this change in behavior that will last after we go out from the lockout? So, Lance, I know you've done quite a bit of research previous to pandemic around buy now, pay later, and it's also end consumers' choice of payments. What do you think if you take what you've seen now, but also if you take your binoculars, what do you think will happen?
Well, I think a number of trends that have been in the market previously will be accelerated by the pandemic. So there's been a significant shift away from cash in Australia over the last 10 years. That's clearly accelerated because people don't want to touch all the bugs that are on the plastic notes. And so even in Australia now, we have merchants that will no longer accept cash. Whether they come back and accept some notes and coins after the virus has left us, yet to be seen. But I think people who felt they had to use cash will see that it's not necessary. There's been a massive drop, of course, in the total number of payments in the economy. As Fran mentioned, the shops have been shut, so people haven't been able to spend. They haven't been able to spend on travel. So again, there's been a long-term trend away from credit cards and into debit. And in fact, I've said before, credit cards are becoming the new seniors card because only old people have them. And so I think you'll see some acceleration there. Most of the buy now, pay later accounts have debit cards associated with them. It may be, as Fran pointed out, that was because of the younger demographic. But to some extent, if you're using buy now, pay later and debit, you've got a quasi credit facility working for you. So you can effectively create your own credit card from a debit card. So buy now, pay later, the number of account inquiries has gone up during the pandemic, whereas, for example, credit card applications have gone down, not surprisingly. So I think generally the trends that were there before accelerate, including, as you just pointed out, in-app payments, which are effectively seamless payments. People are using Uber Eats, Menulog, and other in-app payments where they've embedded a payment facility, usually a card, inside a mobile app, and don't even realize that they've paid whilst they're using it. So previously they were the fastest growing segment of the market here, and they will have grown even more during this time.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think you're right that some trends will definitely not reverse when you've learned the convenience in things. Roland, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about culture in Swedish companies. So you've been working for several Swedish companies in Australia. And what do you see any traits of a Swedish company, how the operations run, the culture, or the technology and innovation that is common between them and that we should sort of lift to the forefront?
I think Swedish companies in general are very much open. It's very flat, even if you have a managing director. It's very much being together and you partner up. And I think it's more flat organization than we are used to here in Australia. It's you really, as an employee, you will be able to do and develop what you are and your expertise are in a much better way than you can do here. I think it's the Australian way. It's a bit more controlled. There's a lot of in between levels to get up to the big boss. In Sweden, it was more flat, it's more open, and that changes a lot, which, you know, people and young people will thrive and if they have the opportunity to work like that. In Australia, I don't think we have, it's not here in the same way.
Yeah, I never worked for a Swedish company, so I can't really comment in that way. But Fran, is this the first Swedish company that you're working for?
It's actually not. I used to work for SACC, so this is my second stint in a Swedish company. But I agree with Roland. I think that culturally, Sweden is very much around flat structures and certainly about empowering and you know, giving autonomy to the employees. The thing I am very proud to say is that certainly Klarna in Australia is following the cultural operating models and rituals and practices, you know, of the Swedish culture, and it is so refreshing. I think the entire team that has joined Klarna, it's the number one comment that we get is, wow, like we're empowered. Wow, we can actually get this done and we've got access to everything and there's no secrets and it's very flat. So we really have had a great response to the type of culture we're creating. It's got a real buzz about it. Everybody's just hustling to, you know, to help us win. There's no egos, and it's all just about, you know, doing what we can to be number one in this country. So I love that side of the Swedish culture. It's fantastic.
So it's potentially I'm going too far with this question, but I think it's really interesting. So I would like Lance comment on it also as looking into Swedish company. And I know you work with CGI and also Bambura before, so you know quite a bit about Swedish payments companies. What have you seen, or is it anything you think that should be lifted further? That this is a thing that also the audience, because we have a lot of Swedish companies in the audience now, what should they lift forward?
I think when we visited Stockholm, we visited quite a lot of the Paytech companies over there. And what was clear, and in my own dealings with people like Bambora, is a much more cooperative attitude, I'd say, to cooperate with potentially competitors in the market, not in the ACCC type of cooperation type thing, but cooperation in terms of making the environment, an ecosystem, work more effectively for the economy and for the country. So there seemed to be a much more sharing approach to ideas and methodologies so that everybody can advance and that to some extent people don't get left behind. I think there's a much, in Australia, I wouldn't say it's protective, but each company is much more out for themselves and more protective of their territory and ideas. And you could argue that that makes for more competition because everyone's trying to outdo each other. But it does detract, I think, from the overall ecosystem in the market.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's totally what I've seen also. One question back to Fran on when you're coming to market now, it's going back a little bit in this setup. So it's two sides to Klarna. As you have the merchants and you have the consumers. This is actually a question that comes in online. It's a bit, where do you start? Do you start with the end consumers or do you start with the merchants? And is it a chicken and an egg scenario?
Yeah, really good question. So for us in the Australian market, we obviously don't have the luxury of building one sort of base without the other. We actually have to build consistently together. So we are at the same time building our consumer and merchant base in the Australian market. And the reason for that is, you know, retailers want to know where are your consumers and consumers want to know where are your retailers. But one of the things that we actually did to help accelerate that was we launched with our consumer ubiquity proposition, which actually means that any consumer can shop anywhere online with Klarna. The anywhere is, of course, caveated with we don't support illicit or illegal products or weapons or things like that. So at mainstream retail, which are all legally wonderful places to shop, that's what we do support. So right now today, we actually don't require any integration with any retailer in Australia. So what that gives a consumer is the ability to shop wherever they like and have what they want and actually experience Klarna. One of the things that you know, merchants are very much loving about Klarna is the fact that we don't drive a payments message. What we drive is that experience. So when you download the Klarna app, what you're actually able to do is create wish lists and collections, and you can actually nominate to have price drop notifications, so that if you like a particular dress or a particular you know, tool at Bunnings, you can effectively say, tell me when there is any change in price for this product, and our app will automatically notify you because we're able to, our technology is built in such a way that we capture all of that information automatically. So what retailers absolutely love is that we deliver warm consumers to them and they don't have to do any work to convert that customer. Whereas the rest of the sort of the payments landscape, and particularly the buy now, pay laters in Australia, don't have that technology to be able to deliver the warm customers to their sites. But it is quite unique in building both simultaneously. But of course, with our partnership with CBA, who is Australia's leading, you know, and largest, I should say, consumer bank, you know, they have, of their 12 million consumers, 4.4 million of them are digitally in that app every single day. So we have access to that entire audience because, of course, every CommBank comes and start using it, you know, any way that they want to. So that's probably, you know, I guess the biggest challenge is building the two together. But I think the value proposition's strong enough to sustain that simultaneous build.
Has that been your go-to-market strategy also in other countries in Europe, that you've been partnering with a bank first, or?
No, well, so in Europe, as you're aware, Klarna is a bank. So
of course, yeah.
The partnership in Australia is actually the first partnership for Klarna anywhere in the world. Every other market we've entered, including the US, has been just as Klarna. And to answer your question, the US and Australia are the only two markets which were launched with the app as the shop anywhere proposition. All the other markets, certainly Europe, we're a mainstay brand in Europe and probably the preferred payment method for most Europeans, to be quite honest. So through Europe and certainly through the UK, it was all built from the merchants and the consumers came with the merchants and through obviously a lot of the work that we did directly trying to attract consumers. But for the US and for ourselves, we led with the shopping app and the ubiquity proposition.
So Lance, you were part of a similar experience when contactless came to Australia, that also push and pull what was first. How long did that take before it balanced out? And I'm talking about the CBA cards.
So CBA did the original trials with MasterCard contactless in certain areas around Sydney back in 2006. And their issuance got well ahead of acceptance. So they ended up with probably 4.5 million contactless cards out in the market, but only a handful of merchants were able to accept their tap and go. And it took a number of years for the acquiring infrastructure to come up to speed. Of course, then in 2012, we had Coles and Woolworths adopt it, which catapulted contactless to the fore. And now Australia has more contactless, open loop contactless transactions per capita than any other country. And we're now seeing I'd have to say, very slow progression into the mobile format, so that tap and go on mobile phones may now be up to about 10% of total tap and go transactions, but it's taken a number of years to get there. But I think Fran is moving the consumer numbers and merchant numbers sort of hopefully in lockstep together to create the right environment. It's hard to do because with something new, it's on a two-sided market, like as she was describing. It's hard to get the numbers balanced out. But if it's the right proposition, then both sides of the market want to grab it.
Yeah, absolutely. Roland, coming to Australia, partner strategies. Is that something that you've been a part of in the companies you've been taking here and trying to align with a bank or another big?
Yeah, no, to bring FPOS terminals, take that as an example, it's same with ATMs. I worked also for ATMs in 6-7 years for using. As the market is, as Lance said, is very dominated by the 4 big banks, it limits where you're going to actually hook on, you know. Somewhere you need to enter and somewhere you need to have a backup with a bank and an acquirer, and that is quite challenging. And that's why it's, with Klarna, they of course they got CBA, which is fantastic. So that makes the pipeline is there. But for us or any other companies coming here, you need to go through a partnership because you need to find a partnership, and it's quite limited if you go outside the 4 banks. I mean, basically, there are 3 switches that will allow you to, if they like you, it's not, there's another question, to enter, and then you have to certify it through them. And that makes it very hard. But you need partnership. Without partnership, is very difficult. So you need a sponsor from both sides, from the switch. You need acquire, but then you need a customer locally also that are willing to invest, because the cost is dramatic in this country to do certain things, and everybody wants to have a piece of the pie before you're even up and running, and that stops a lot of companies coming here because the costs are enormous to do.
That was what I was leading into, because we see some of those that I mentioned at the beginning, some really good fintech and paytech companies. And I've been reaching out and saying, come to Australia. So you think that is a big thing they have to solve before coming to get that aligned?
Yeah, you need to understand how the market works here. Yes, I mean, if for FPOS we have 100 or 1 million FPOS devices in Australia. Also with new technologies, a lot of these FPOS are PC3 equivalent, or even we should have been lapsed this year. Now we've got another extension for the pandemic, but there is so many old devices out in the market that can't do tap and go, and it's not updated. And then most of the devices out there are supplied by the banks, and they are not integrated to any systems of your POS system or into your ERP system or whatever. So it's very fragmented. So to launch here, yes, you need some muscles, but you definitely need, if you have a bank supporting you, makes a big difference. But you need a partnership, you need a strong local company that are willing to invest with you and to take the ride. But it takes a long time to certify device hardware, and then you have to certify your firmware, and then on and on. It takes 3 to 6 months just to do certification. Then you have to do tests, and the cost is unfortunately very expensive. I would say it's 3 times as more expensive to do it here than it is to do in Europe.
It's not as if Australia is underserved in payments to start with. So we don't have people rioting in the streets worrying about how they're going to pay. So for somebody new to come into the market, you've got to have a fairly strong proposition, hopefully like Klarna, to gain the audience that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think we saw some of those new companies. I'm thinking specifically about Minna Technology and Tink, which is an open banking platform. So we're getting a little bit detailed in. I haven't actually looked who's in the audience, but 2 very brilliant Swedish fintechs that I think would do really well here. So I don't know if Fran or maybe the other Camilla knows, does the Swedish, what sort of help or allowances that the Swedish government do for the Swedish fintechs coming out? Fran, were you in touch with anything like that? Has the Swedish government?
No, so I'd have to come back to you on that one, or take that one on notice. I'm not actually across anything that the Swedish government did or didn't do to support our entry into this market, but I could certainly find out and come back to you.
Yeah. I think it's one thing I probably should know myself when I'm trying to get them to come here. So it's on my homework. We've got a few questions in here. So is there a list of Swedish fintechs coming to Australia? I don't know. That's another one on my homework.
Well, some are here already. I mean, Bambora purchased 2 businesses here some time ago. Both in payments gateway and in the FPOS machine side of things. So I think it's interesting that often the globalization of these businesses, unless they're very consumer facing, like Klarna, right? Bambora is not very consumer facing. It's in the background. And I suspect there's more Swedish activity in the payment system than we see to the naked eye.
Yeah, we actually have a Swedish Parkway, I think they're called. I hadn't heard about them myself, but it's a Swedish payments technology to help when you park your car. And apparently they're really big in Australia, in New Zealand, and in Spain. So I'm hoping to get to know those guys later on. Just back to Fran a little bit about the plans and how the next 12 to 18 months will look. What sort of big goalstones do you have, or milestones that you're looking to reach, and where do you want to be this time next year?
Oh, this time next year. So we're only 14 weeks old, so that would make us just over a year old this time next year. Look, we've got pretty big ambitions. Like Klarna for the rest of the world, we want to be the #1 shopping experience in every country that we're represented in. So our ambition is to become #1 in the Australian market. I think, as I said, the job that we've got to do, and I think Lance is sort of teetering on the edge there of recognizing it's all about consumer engagement, right? And if consumers see value in a proposition and they feel that that's a great product for them to use and it becomes their way to pay, then that's ultimately what will give us the success that we're looking for. And given our experience in the multitude of markets around the world, I'm really confident that we can do that. So for us, this time next year, I'd like to see that, you know, we've finished disrupting the market and we're starting to take considerable share from the competition, but with the main objective being giving consumers the best possible experience, you know, when it comes to shopping, and making it seamless, making it engaging, being personalized, and making sure that in every interaction and way that we talk to them, it's relevant and meaningful. I think as consumers, all of us would agree that our inboxes are flooded with emails and offers and, you know, this, that, and the next thing, but how much of it is actually relevant and meaningful to us? And what we want to do is stand out and make sure that, you know, for the retailers and partners that we're working with, who we are obviously a great medium for them to talk to an audience, that we're talking to them in that really meaningful way that benefits everybody. So that's, you know, sort of what our key objective is. Just on your question in terms of the Swedish government. So I'm not aware of anything that the Swedish government did, but Austrade certainly was very helpful to us entering this market, made a lot of introductions and provided a lot of support.
Yeah. Is that, is Klarna used as a verb anywhere else?
Klarna is known as Klarna across the world.
I meant in Sweden, you say you swish money. So swish has become a verb. You Klarna something? So
throughout the UK, it's no drama, just Klarna. So that's what it is throughout the UK. The US, it's just, everyone else is just Klarna, but not as, I guess, to the extent of the verb. It's almost like it's not spoken about. It's just an action that people do. But yeah, through the UK, it's no drama, just Klarna.
Good. So all the audience, you're welcome to send in some questions if you have them. And while you think about that, I'm going to see if we have converted some people during this talk when we've heard what Klarna can do. This is not frictionless. This is actually more value. Do you want to launch that last poll and to see if people try, they're going to use buy now, pay later over the next 12 months, Camilla?
Yeah, I'm gonna see. Hold on. There we go. Can everybody see it now?
Okay, so. Good. And also, I think the audience is slightly shy. So I'm going to say, Roland, you have the chance to ask Fran questions that are not just me asking the questions here. Would you say something?
Oh, that was
Lance also.
No, I think Klarna's solution is very interesting. I think I would actually advise also Fran and Klarna to look at other opportunities to use your app. And could be, as you said, you mentioned Bunnings and home renovation, but if you maybe should launch it into the tradies. I mean, the traders love cash, and then the cash is going to go away in this country. I mean, here's an opportunity to look at all the traders that do a lot of renovations for people. If they can offer Klarna, I think there could be some really, a new market for you.
Thank you. It's definitely, I think the whole services space is a really interesting space for, for the sector. I think that it's that there's a lot of opportunity in it, but I also think there's a lot of challenges with it as well. There is no question that a lot of tradies are using buy now, pay later because, as you know, they have to potentially buy new tools or buy, componentry to do whatever the job is that they're doing, and the customer doesn't pay them until they finish that job. So if there's a way that they can obviously, buy with a deferred payment method like ours and then be able to pay us when they receive the money from the consumer, it obviously works very well for them. So there is definitely use cases for it, and I know there's a lot of demand. It's certainly something that we will look at.
A question for you, Fran. The buy now, pay later sector has come under some criticism in regard to responsible lending and the fact that as an individual, you could have multiple buy now, pay later accounts with Afterpay, Zip, Klarna and anybody else, and that there doesn't seem to be much interconnectivity between those different schemes, or much visibility anyway. Do you think there is a danger of becoming overburdened with credit through buy now, pay later? What's your view on that?
Look, I think that, first and foremost, Klarna is very much a responsible lender. So we credit and ID check every single consumer, and we're actually not just looking straight at, a hard credit check. We are looking at a multitude of touch points to be able to have a look and understand, or better understand, each and every consumer's financial position at every point in time. So, I just want to start with saying, as a lender, we really do our best to utilize services and our own decisioning engine to make the best decision for the consumer, because it's in our interest to look after the consumer. Your point, however, around when we do those checks, we don't necessarily have visibility to whether or not somebody has that extended or outstanding debts with anybody else, be that a credit card or another buy now, pay later, is a really valid one. And I think that that's where the move to open banking and having greater access to more information will become really important, because at the end of the day, I don't think there'd be very many consumers who would be against people being able to know enough about them to help protect them. I don't think any consumer would want anybody going out to put them in a worse off position. So I actually think that they would embrace, the ability for people to have visibility, to their financial position to make the right decisions. Hopefully that sort of answered your question. It's it's a pretty topical conversation. I think talking to, being Swedish and also being very regulated in most of the markets that we work in across the world, the one thing Klarna is very focused on is having collaborative discussions with other players to see how we can collectively do the right thing by consumers. I think the challenge is whether other players are willing to be collaborative and have those discussions. So we're certainly happy to step up to the table and have those discussions. And think it's an important discussion to have, and important for the economy and consumers, and the sustainability of retail as well.
We have another audience question here, also a little bit towards the same direction. So how does Klarna deal with bad debt? Customer is late paying or doesn't pay?
So we obviously encourage consumers to repay. We have launched in the Australian market with no late fees at all, because we wanted to learn about customers' behaviours. We will be implementing late fees, which is very known, to all of the customers that have signed up. In fact, it's in our terms and conditions what our late fee structure is. But what we've actually got is a carrot approach rather than a stick approach. So within our product, there is the ability to snooze a repayment for a fixed period of time, and you can only snooze once in your repayment cycle. And the idea there is that somebody pays a very low nominal fee to rather snooze and get an extra few days than to miss that payment and fall into an arrears. If in the unfortunate case somebody does fall into arrears, we have a whole series of processes that come into play to try and work with that consumer. If they're obviously needing an extended period to pay, we will work through a hardship solution with them to make sure that we're giving them the best opportunity to pay that outstanding debt. And of course, if it goes beyond us being able to recover the cost, then we do work with a collection agency as does everybody else. But the expectation is that our bad debts should be particularly low, and the reason for that is because we do all the work up front. So we do truly believe, and we are seeing that because we make decisions up front and we're using the engine to do that, that we're able to make decisions to protect us as well.
Good, thank you for that. Another question here. Given it is such a competitive landscape in Australia with Afterpay, FlexiPay, Zip, how does Klarna intend to compete strategies to market share? I think we almost probably have touched a bit on that in the extra section.
So I think just really simply put, we honestly believe, and if you know those products and you look at the the way that they work and how their apps work and how the actual process for transacting occurs. It's very transactional. So there is no relationship between the payment type and the consumer. Whereas Klarna, as I said, is all about the experience. We're not only trying to be a payment method, we're trying to help people get what they want, how they want, at the price that they want it, in a way that's much sort of warmer and engaging through personalization and learning about them. So that is our key differentiation strategy, to be honest. It's really about creating a relationship with that consumer and not just being a transactional provider.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Camilla, could we see the results from the last question? And I have to admit, I had never used the Buy Now, Pay Later service before this morning when I downloaded Klarna and bought some KKK stuff to my mother-in-law.
Oh, nice. Good brand to buy from too.
Well, they're still around, hey? Buy Now, Pay Later. Yes, so 59% thinks they will use it in the near future. Mm-hmm. So that's good. We have... I guess, told people about an option. So with that, I would say thank you so much, Fran. I'm looking forward to follow you more closely now than overseas, and people know what I'm talking about. Lance, always a pleasure to have you on my panels. And Roland, also thank you so much for coming on board, and I hope to get the pleasure to have you on board panel later on. Camilla, I think you had a few more announcements, but
yes, thank you very much, and thank you to all attendees for joining us this afternoon. I just want to show our upcoming events, which is still online. Just hold on a second, I'm just going to share my screen here.
An online midsummer celebration coming on?
I don't know if the young professionals might do it. All right, can everybody see this now? So we have a webinar coming up on the 26th of May at 4 p.m. And that's organized by the European Australian Business Council. And it's about Europe and Australia seizing opportunities for recovery and bounce back. And we have the keynote address there by Dr. Stephanie Fay, I can't pronounce that properly, Executive Officer of Austrade, and chaired by the Honorary Simon Crean from the EABC Chair and former Australian Minister for Trade. Then we go on. We have a very good cooperation between the Swedish chambers in Australia and Asia Pacific. And we have a webinar coming up here on the 10th of June at 5 p.m., which is a great time for us here in Australia. 3 p.m. in China, where it's hosted. And that's with Anna Hallberg, Minister for Foreign Trade and Nordic Affairs in Sweden, and Jakob Wallenberg, Chairman of Investor. And we have Peter Ling Vannerus, Chief Representative at the SEB in Beijing, China. So that's on the 10th of June. Members can attend this one for free, and there will be a small charge for non-members. And that's the same for all the members of the Asia Pac chambers. Then we have the 11th of June, the third webinar in the series of the COVID-19 impact on business and trade. And here we will focus on the future business climate, the sustainable agenda, and learnings of what we have experienced so far. Panelists are the former ambassador to Australia, Per Ahlberger, he will join in from Sweden. He is now the Ambassador for Sustainable Business, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm. And then we have Sarah Goss, and she is Head of Innovation at Ericsson here in Australia and New Zealand. Then we have Sam Åkerby. He actually has a Swedish background, and he is the Head of Commercial Development at Lend-Lease here in Australia. So that webinar is then on 11th of June at 4 o'clock. We do have a little social event coming up, and that's going to be with the theme Swedish National Day. And please have a look at our website and follow us on social media, where you will have all the updates of the events and online webinars. As restrictions are easing, we will organize some smaller events and we will highlight that as soon as we are able to with the eased restrictions. And if you're interested in becoming a member, get onto our website or email us, and we can give you more information about that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody, for this time.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.